Dear Heavenly Father, I just ask you to just touch everyone here, dear Lord, and just give me the words to say, dear Lord, and just let them open up their hearts, dear Lord, to what we're saying. In your name I pray. Amen. Okay, the name of this lesson is going to be How Rude. How rude. Okay, the Public Agenda, a non-profit group, interviewed more than 2,000 people in a study on civility and manners called Aggravating Circumstances. A status report on rudeness in America. The group revealed that 8 in 10 Americans say a lack of respect and courtesy is a serious problem. And 6 in 10 say things have become worse in recent years. More than a third, 35%, admit being aggressive drivers. He knew who. Yeah. 3/4 of those surveyed said they're often seeing customers treat sales staff rudely, while 46% also say they've walked out of a store because of the way the staff treated them. Nearly everyone surveyed, 94%, agreed that the biggest complaint is to call a company and get it recorded instead of a person. And 77% say telemarketing is rude and pushy. I agree there. While 3/4 say that people have become more caring and thoughtful to others after the terrorist attack on September the 11th, but that feeling would not last. And that's how it is now. 46% thought it would last a few months, and 18% believed that it was already over. And I believe it's more like 90% over by now, because this was done in 2004, so you can imagine how rude the world is now. More than 2/3 say they've witnessed parents shouting at coaches, referees, or players. And if you turn on the TV nowadays, you'll see them more than just shouting and being rude to them. Okay, David was the great Jewish hope to the throne, the next in line to succeed Saul. And he was more like a Zorro or a Robin Hood. He had all the backs of the people. The people loved him. And even though they thought they should thank him for all of his victories with the Philistines and the Amorites and everybody, but then they heard he was Saul's enemy. He had no army. He had befriended Moab, so he had to befriend them to take his family to them so they would not be killed. Suddenly, David was out of luck, out of favor, and out on his own on the run. The former hero would soon be the ex-son-in-law to Saul. How do you respond when you're treated like dirt or scum? What could you do if you were pushed out, pushed too far, and pushed to the edge? What would you do? Push back, wouldn't you? Think it over again. What? Don't excite your heart or decide when you're angry. Then Samuel died. Now this is 1 Samuel 25, chapter 25. Then Samuel died, and the Israelites gathered together and lamented for him and buried him in his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Moab whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. The name of the man was Nabal, and his wife was Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance. But the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. When David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say to him who lives prosperity, Peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David." So when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David and waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men whom I do not know where they are from?" So David's young men turned on their heels and went back, and they came and told him of all these words. When a traveler entered a small town diner, patrons were gathered around watching intently at the presidential news conference that was blaring on the TV. The outsider listened to the president's speech impatiently and agitatedly for a few minutes, then blurted out in frustration in front of everybody, "Boy, Joe Biden sure is a horse's rear." Suddenly, nearly every person in the diner beat him to a pulp. Dismayed, the stranger got up and exclaimed to the owner, "Wow, this must really be Biden country." "Nope," stranger responded the owner. "This is not Biden country. This is horse country. Don't insult the horses that way." Someone once said temperamental is 95% temper and 5% mental. Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be. And that was Thomas Kempis. See, David almost lost his head, didn't he, when he was insulted? He had tried so hard to be good, to be the nice guy, go around helping everybody, to do the right thing, even though he was running from Saul. But he had it up to here with tycoons like Nabal. He was sick and tired of people like him. David and his men had done a lot for him. They were not freeloaders. They didn't want money from him constantly. They were not beggars to go and beg. According to Nabal's servant, David and his men had volunteered to guard Nabal's flocks from bandits, thieves, wild animals for an extended period of time, without pay or complaint. But they were looked down, laughed at, and taken for granted. Nabal had the means and the grounds to offer a token gift to David for his services. But he was not just wealthy, but very wealthy and very great. 3,000 sheep was a large flock. 1,000 goats. That was a lot of animals roaming around, wasn't it? The only biblical figure described in Hebrew as very great and with comparable numbers was Job. And Job was the greatest in Hebrew, a very great. And he was the greatest among all the people in the East in his time. He had 7,000 sheep. Nabal had about half the wealth that Job had, and feasted like a king. What he wasted on one meal would have fed David and his 600 men. But he was selfish, wasn't he? So David approached Nabal like a gentleman. Instead of just going in there and taking what he wanted, he asked for it. He made sure his intentions were not misunderstood. The word peace occurs 4 times in verses 5 and 6. The Hebrew text says, Shalom him in many names, shalom to you, shalom to your house, and shalom to all that you have. David did not specify sheep. He didn't ask him for sheep. He just asked for what he had that he could spare. He left it at Nabal's wisdom and generosity. Whatever he could find. You know, it'd be hard to find food for 600 people around here, wouldn't it? So it need not cost Nabal an arm or a leg, just what he could afford to give. David's men were courteous and humble and said, please, or in Hebrew, I pray. But Nabal did not even ask his servants that David had told them, ask your servants what we done for you. See, back then they had, bandits would just roam around where sheep and where the shepherds were, because the shepherds had no way of fighting them off. All they had was a staff. If a bandit wanted something, they could just come in there and take what they wanted. They didn't have no way of fighting them. So if they wanted to take his sheep, they could take his sheep. If they wanted to take their servants and just leave the flock out there in the open, they could do that too. But see, David, he was a good guy. He just went around and tried to help everyone that he could, because he loved his people. And he had a shepherd's heart because he was a shepherd. He knew what these shepherds went through when they was out there, because he used to do the same job as a child. So now here we come to, he said, Nabal, he said, the Hebrew text is, shall I take my bread? And he used the word my to humiliate them. Because, even if he didn't want to give them food, he could give them water. Because water was free, and bread, it was cheap. And he wouldn't even do that. And furthermore, he wanted to humiliate them for just asking for it. Because insults, that's all he wanted to do, was just throw insults at David and his men, because he was so high and mighty with himself that he thought he could get by with it, that David wouldn't do nothing. So David had pleaded with him, but his insults were so bad that he used the personal pronoun my 4 times. Shall I take my bread, my water, my meat, and that I have slaughtered for my shares? He didn't even say God had given me all this stuff. It was he done it. It was mine. And to add insult, He even called David a runaway servant, even though David politely referred to him as a father figure, because he said, your son. So he referred to him as a father figure. The messengers were not spared when Nabal questioned who they were, where they were from, and what they had done. Talk it out with others. Don't lose your head or jump to conclusions. David said to his men, put on your swords. So they put on their swords. And David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields, near them nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us all the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 fleeces of grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his were missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. Listen, you see how David was? He was mad, wasn't he? Angry. Consider the hammer. It keeps his head. It doesn't fly off of the handle. It keeps pounding away. It finds the point, then drives it home. It looks at the other side too, then clinches the matter. It makes mistakes, but when it does, it starts all over. David had never seen such a ill-mannered, ill-natured, ill-speaking man before. He thought that there was nothing good about Nabal, but there was, wasn't there? The people around him, his wife, his servants. They were not miserly, mean, or macho like David. His wife, she was kind, moral, and classy. So here the servants had a good word for David and his men. So here she rounded up the stuff to take to David to alert, he was going to slaughter the whole family. Back then, they went into a town and they just didn't kill him. They killed all the men. So David was going to do that. Yes. And see, Nabal's wife, Abigail, was more outstanding than any of the other biblical beauties. She was one of the 7 Old Testament beauties, along with Sarah, Rachel, 2 Tamars, Abinishag, Esther, who was described as beautiful in Hebrew, but she had another description added to her as intelligent, understanding, smart. See, she was the only beauty in the Bible praised for her intelligence. The Hebrew text extolled her for her good understanding. Not only was she the first person in the Bible noted for her intelligence, she was also the only known individual with having good understanding in Hebrew. Not just understanding, but good understanding. You know, they didn't hold women up very high, did they, back in those days? So she had something money could not provide. Makeup couldn't help. Men cannot repress. And something more powerful accompanied her than muscles. Bodyguards are weapons. She had brains. You might ask then, what was an intelligent woman like Abigail doing with Nabal, who was called an idiot or a fool? Probably so. She was sold to him, probably for a dowry. Because, yeah, Nabal was one of the richest men in that area. Yeah, he probably... And, you know, he probably saw how intelligent she was, and, you know, she would make his money grow, his household grow. His servants would, you know, they would cater to her because she was so intelligent. Yes, she was a Proverbs 31 woman. So, for the Bible never said that Nabal was obese, unfaithful, abusive, or ugly. It just said he was a mean, didn't it? Abigail was someone a husband or servant, stranger could talk to. They could interrupt you. You know, back then you had to have an audience with someone of that caliber to even be able to interrupt them. But her servants felt that they could even go in there and talk to her, didn't they? They couldn't talk to him, but they could talk to her. So they could interrupt her schedule, bring their problems to her, and seek her for advice. They knew she would find a solution. So make things right and break a deadlock. She understood the heart of a servant who called her husband a wicked man. And she even offered to wash David's servants' feet, his men's feet. So her intelligence was the ability to size things up, seize the moment, and save the day. She had to act and act quickly. She had no opportunity to talk to her drunken husband. And we'll see about that in a minute. So this chapter has the most haste references in Hebrew in the Bible. Abigail brought 5 of the 3,000 sheep to the men. 5 of 3,000 was nothing, because wolves were probably killed that many if his men hadn't been protecting them. So she fell on her face, bowed to the ground, and dropped at his feet, and said in Hebrew, "Upon me, my Lord, the sin." With one act, she took her husband's foolishness, selfishness, and pettiness upon herself. She would have had David to kill her before he took his anger out on Nabal and the other men of the family. She called herself David's servant, using the lowly title, your servant, 7 times, and overturned her phrase in one biblical character, and overturned her husband's insult of David as a runaway slave with her 14 times salutation of David as my Lord. Whatever David felt aches by her husband, they would dissolve with her remorse, wouldn't they? She interjected with her speech with please or I pray, which is they're not recorded in the NIV version. So David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment in keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. See, dispensing good advice is an art. You know who to go to when you want advice, don't you? You just don't go to just anybody, do you? Because sometimes their advice will... Some people give advice with what they think you want to hear, not what you need to hear. So, good advice is worth a fortune. It's not hard. It is hard to get. It's rarer than rubies. It's also something a man gives when he's too old to set a bad example. Advice is what we ask when we already know the answer but wish we didn't. Giving advice is something only showing our wisdom at the expense of others. He who can take advice is sometimes superior to him who can give it. I sometimes give myself admirable advice, but I am capable of taking it. And that was Mary Montague. If you can distinguish between good advice and bad advice, then you don't need advice. Most people, they really don't want advice. They just want to ask you what you think. People are always willing to follow advice when it accords with their own wishes. Some people like my advice so much that they frame it upon the wall instead of using it. And these come from quotelady.com. That's why you see all these little people where they used to do cross stitch, and they have all these little quotes of advice. It's on the wall instead of using it. David knew he was standing by, staring at and sitting on a gold mine of advice. That was Abigail. She had him into thinking theoretically, morally, and historically. The phrase, the Lord, was mentioned 7 times. Morally twice. She reiterated the weakness of giving into bloodshed and vengeance after her introduction and at the conclusion, beginning with, let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. He didn't follow that advice long, did he? And culminating with, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. She warned him that shedding innocent blood was crossing the point of no return. Because once you kill somebody, you can't take that back, can you? I mean, they're dead, they're gone. Yeah, when you're dead, you're dead. Now Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was, holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. So it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like stone. Then it happened after about 10 days that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. There he was, holding a feast, being like a king in his house, drinking, being merry. He had lived up his name, didn't he? Nabal meant fool, and he lived up to that name. His life was in imminent danger from 600 men descending on his family, his house, his servants. And here all he could do was just sit in there and eat and get drunk. See, David would have certainly have killed Nabal, and it is certain that God will judge the sinner that who continues to reject him. That's how certain it is. Like the feast of their king, all Nabal had to do was invite David to this feast, and Nabal's life would have been spared. Nabal's own greed and foolishness was his undoing. His heart died within him. I think it was fear of what could have happened to him. He became like stone, and the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. See, Abigail's wise action from God's judgment. Nabal was never out of God's reach, and when it was the right time, God took care of it, didn't he? He didn't leave it up to David, and David was going to take his own way about it. And you know, that's how we do sometimes, isn't we? We get angry, we get mad, and we take things in our own hands. And then what happens? Consequences. And if you're a Christian, it destroys your Christian character, don't it? I mean, one act in anger can destroy a person, can it? Tell you, if you're up here and doing good, and then when you get angry and lash out at someone or do something, what's everybody going to be talking about? That one thing. They're not going to talk about all the good that you... It's always the bad. That's how people are, isn't it? See, Jesus may have had Nabal in mind when he taught the parable of the rich fool. That parable describes a man who dies with everything and has nothing. All which time he lay like a block in his bed, without repentance and confidence in God, but condemned of his own conscience. He went to his place without noise. Let this be a warning to drunkards. Yep. Okay, so when David heard that Nabal was dead, and said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach. I had to find that word. Reproach. From the head of Nabal, and has kept his servant from evil. For the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head." And David sent and proposed to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David had come to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, "David sent us to you to ask you to become his wife." Then she arose, bowed her face to the earth, and said, "Here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." So Abigail rose in haste and rode on a donkey, attended by 5 of her maidens, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and so both of them were his wives. But Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Patali, the son of Lash, who was from Gilead. 39 through 44.
I'm just going to take these two, man.
39 through 44. So after Nabal died, she had no reason to marry David, did she? She was a very rich woman, wouldn't she? But she saw David with her hopes. She believed in David, his roots, his redemption, and his reign, and his deliverance, his dreams, and his destiny. She saw something in David that she wanted, didn't she? She used the word captain or leader that was used of Saul up to this point. You know, when she married David, what did she have? She had all this land, all these sheep, all these cattle, and then she left all of that to go live in a cave. Would y'all do that? Not many people would. Yeah, I guess so. You hear that? Food stamps. Yeah, that's why all David had. He didn't even have food stamps. He had to go beg for his food. David acknowledged that Abigail saved him from doing evil, from behaving and being like Saul. What did Saul do when he got mad? Well, that too, but what did he do to all the priests? Killed 80 priests, went into the city where these priests lived, killed all their wives, children, livestock, everything. In anger, he wiped out the whole town. I mean, he killed everybody. David was a fugitive, but never a murderer, bandit, or thug. David recognized God was at work, sending him a message through Abigail. The truth was, she came in her own judgment. David confessed that he was on the way to doing wrong, but he was also going to commit evil when he decided to take justice in his own hands. Everyone has a dark side, a sore foot, or a bad day. But two wrongs do not make a right. Twice the Bible encourages believers not to be weary in doing good. As believers, we should seize the moment, not spare a second. Save the day, not spoil the day. We need to seek to forgive, heal, and always bless others. Not only in the good times, but also in the bad times. And when Mike was doing his last night, I thought, he's going to get my lesson. Okay, I'm going to go on. This one is not, it's only 2 pages. So I'm going to go ahead and do 26. Make choices that reflect God's will. Okay, well, I'm going to read 1 Samuel 26. And I have a feeling you have read this before. But this encounter is very similar to chapter 24 when David was in the cave and he went and cut off Saul's corner of his garment. But in this one, he took Saul's spear and water jug. You know, David could have easily have killed Saul in both of these chapters. but he did not. It was a choice he made. He was not coerced into making it. It was a deliberate decision on his part. You know, his men probably said, go ahead, kill him. I'm tired of all this running. I mean, I'm tired. I want to be I want a real bed. I don't want to lay on the cave on the ground. So, you know, they probably was encouraging him, kill him. Don't let's just run. Huh? Yeah. See, the guiding principle is clear. This was not God's will. See, David knew that when God was ready for Saul to go, Saul was going to go. That it was not David's to do. Make choices that reflect God's will. We all have choices, don't we? We have to know what choice to make, don't we? If David can do it, we can do it too, can't we? It not only glorifies God when you make the right choice, when you're in His will, it also blesses us, don't it? When we do what's in God's will. Because God will bless us if we're in His will and we do something. Okay, the Zephites, oh, I didn't even read it. My tablet went off. Okay. Now the Zephites came to Saul at Gilboa saying, is David not hiding in the hill of Hashkua, opposite of Jemison? Jeshimon. Then Saul rose and went down to the wilderness of Zeph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness of Zeph. And Saul encamped in the hill of, which is opposite of Jeshimon, by the road. But David stayed in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul had indeed come. So David arose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Now Saul lay within the camp with the people encamped all around him. Then David answered and said to Amalek the Hittite and Abishi the son of Zulu, brother of Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishi said, I will go with you. So David and Abishai is what I was, came to the people by night, and there Saul lay sleeping within the camp, and his spear stuck in the ground by his head. And Abner and the people lay all around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore, please let me strike him once with a spear right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time. But just one time. Then David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, and he shall go out to battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But please take now the spear and the jug of water there by his head, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jug of water by Saul's head, and they got away. And no man saw or knew it or awoke, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. Now David went over to the other side and stood on the hill, top of a hill afar off, a great distance being between them. And David called out to the people and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, Do you not answer Abner? Then Abner answered and said, Who are you calling out to the king? So David said to Abner, Are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy your lord the king. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not guarded your master, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jug of water that was by his head. Then Saul knew David's voice and said, Is that your voice, my son David? David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, Why does my Lord thus pursue his servant? For what have I done, and what evil is at my hand? Now therefore, please let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But as the children of men may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go, serve other gods. So now do not let my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord. For the king of Israel has not come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will not harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. Do y'all believe that? David didn't either. And David answered and said, Here is the king's spear. Let one of the young men come over and get it. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. And indeed, as your life was valued much this day in my eyes, so let my life be valued much in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, May you be blessed, my son David. You shall both do great things, and also shall prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. Okay, here we have the Zephyrites again. They have run and told Saul where David's hiding again. So here instead of him coming with just a few men to hunt David, he brought 3,000 men for one man. Instead of him doing what God had ordained him to do, to take out his enemies, he was coming after another anointed of God, wasn't he? And this was sad, wasn't it? Here David would take his 600 men and fight their real enemy, the Philistines and the Amorites and all these other fractions that's come up against the Israelite people. And here Saul would take 3,000 men and go after one man of his own son-in-law, someone he was supposed to love. So here David decided he was going to go into Saul's camp. And he took one of his men, Abashi, and sneaked into his camp at night. And God had put them all to sleep. Abashi said, he thought he was going in there to really do something, didn't he? He thought, man, I'm going to kill me the king. We're going to kill him dead. We're going to be great. And all he wanted to do was just take his water bottle and his spear. Yeah. I bet he thought, man, what's wrong with you, David? Yeah. And, Yeah, he said, I can do a neat and clean job. They won't even know he's dead till he's dead. Yeah, and this is a God-given opportunity. And we can't blame him, can we? It would be a natural impulse for anybody, wouldn't it? To want to do something like that to somebody that had been trying to kill you all 4 years now. But David had six reasons to kill Saul that night. Saul was the guilty one. David was a victim of wrongful treatment. He had a good opportunity. He had the weapon he needed. He had the man to do it. It was a Washi. He had the support of his comrades. He has a high chance of success of doing it too, doesn't he? Everything screams at him to just do it, don't it? His men are telling him to do it. Everybody's telling him to do it. But everything that comes from the flesh, the desires of the flesh, Galatians 5:16, do not gratify the desires of the flesh. Walk by Spirit. Rely on the Holy Spirit's guidance. David was against it. He listened to what God said, didn't he? He had a heart for God, didn't he? He wasn't there for this. This was not his goal, was it? Neither is this the will of God. 26, now, but David said to Abashi, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he said, the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come or he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But said, the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. This is like what he said in chapter 24, wouldn't it? When he cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He was conscience-stricken then, wouldn't he? He rebuked his men for such a thought of wanting to kill Saul, didn't he? Because he was anointed. Killing Saul was not his goal. He gave 2 reasons. It wasn't his place. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? No one. Even if Saul is ungodly or corrupt, he is still God's anointed. And no one can take his life without guilt. It wasn't the right time. The Lord himself will strike him in his time. I don't know when and how God will do it, but one thing is sure, it is not his job. That's what David thought. It wasn't his job. So that explains why God does not want us to take revenge on somebody. I think that's the whole purpose of this chapter, is to show, even though you're being pursued, it's God's time. God is the only one that can take revenge on somebody. Not us. Leave it to him. He is perfectly capable of righting the wrongs that's done to us, isn't he? Instead, David asked Abashi to take Saul's spear and water jug. Imagine this. What he would be thinking. Yeah, right. We come all this way through all these dangers, walk around all these men into this camp of 3,000 men. And the way they done it back then, the king would be in the middle and all the soldiers. Could you imagine 3,000 men around him and him in the middle, and you having to go through all 3,000 of those men just to get a water jug and a spear? I bet he thought, woo. Here's going to be I'm going to paraphrase this. when he stood up and said that, Abner, you're a lousy guard. You fell asleep while your king was up there. You deserve to die. Just look around. Where's the king's spear? Where's his water jug? It's gone. What were you doing? You and all your men deserve to die. Twice Saul could have died, once in the cave and now in the camp, and his men were incapable of protecting him, wouldn't they? The one who can was David. He showed them that he could protect him. He was Saul's servant. He was his supporter and his defender. And now his enemy. And what had he done? He'd chased him all over the countryside now for 4 years trying to kill him. David wants to talk to Saul, and I think this is the way he has to do it. He has to show him he can kill him anytime he wants to, but that he does not want to. That it's the Lord's time to take revenge. It's not his time. So he wanted to know why Saul hated him so much, that he had done Saul no wrong. And we don't always suffer for our own sin. We sometimes suffer for other people's sin, don't we? Because others have sinned. And most of the time, for no apparent reason. We just don't know, do we? So, the Lord has incited you against me, then he must accept an offering. Meaning, if I am guilty of some wrongdoing and the God is using you to discipline me, then I am willing to confess my sin and offer a sacrifice to God. And if, however, men have done it, may they be cursed of the Lord. Let the Lord deal with them. There is no simple answer for David, are there? He does not have the answers to the wise. But one thing David is sure of, the Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. And that's 26:23. See, we trust God, and we have to trust God that he knows what he's doing, don't we? And he will reward us according to his righteousness and his faithfulness. One thing is clear in all these years of running, David did not lose faith in God, did he? He says righteous, and he stays faithful to God. He did not take matters in his own hands. And he could have. We saw an angry side of him a while ago, didn't we? He could have lashed out in anger against Saul. And he had a right to, didn't he? But he didn't. He let God handle it. He waits for God to work out his plan. Even if it means running for his life, his family running for their life, and his men. The same experience Apostle Paul had, there will be some unknowns in life, but we know that they are not unknowns to God. That's where trust comes in. God will reward the righteous and faithful. Saul was moved by David's kindness. I have sinned. Come back, David, my son. Do you think he was sincere? No. He still had that evil in his heart, didn't he? This will be their last meeting. David went into the camp with a purpose in mind. It was unlike chapter 24 when Saul stepped into the cave by chance. Sneaking into the camp was deliberate and it was planned. Why not to kill Saul? We've already established that, hadn't we? Was it to prove that he could kill Saul and did not? Possible, but quietly unlikely, because he had already done that in the cave. Why would he risk his life to prove the same point? And I think a lot of time the reason God put him in that deep sleep, he was testing him. That's what I think. I think he was testing David to see if his heart was really where it was supposed to be. Yeah. Yes, it was a test. But see, David, he wants to offload something. He wants a chance to talk to Saul. He wants to offload something in his heart. And it comes out of his words that best sums up the last sentence he said to Saul. I valued your life today. You see, I did not kill you. The sense is David wants Saul to know that he really cares about him, that he really loves him. He risked his life to make a chance to make this point, that he loved him. Did Saul get it? We can't be sure, can we? This son of Jesse has become David, my son. David's love changed him. David loved his enemies, didn't he? That's the love of Christ. That's the choice we have to make too, don't we? David set a great example for us, didn't he? Even in his downfalls, in his lowest, he's always an example what we need to do, isn't he? How we can love our enemies and how much God looks after us. He looks after us no more than what he looks after David. He loves us the same that he loved David. And when we can grasp that, we have the whole world, don't we? That he loved David, he loves us too. And because he done more for us. He sent his son to die for us. He didn't do that for David, did he? So we have so much more than what David had. All David had was his faith to step out on. We had Jesus Christ with grace, faith, everything that David didn't have. See, David didn't have that hope that he was going to go to heaven. He just had the hope of God, that God is going to protect us, protect him, put his protection on him. Because, see, they had to do sacrifices every year still and everything. And, we was talking earlier about him marrying twice. Was not in God's plan. And I think that's why God had his hand against his family all the time, part of it. Because look how much turmoil was in his family with his kids fighting against each other. Because he went out of God's plan when he married more than one time. So he was out of God's will. And see, David is like us sometimes. He does stuff and don't think about the consequences. And that's how we do sometimes. We do stuff. We just step out and do stuff, and like David did, and don't think about what's the consequences of me doing this. So when you do something, you have to think about, okay, what's going to happen? If I marry two women, what's going to happen later on? Yeah, they're going to fight. Jealousy. And how willing are we to show grace and do good to those who offend us? 1 Peter 3:9. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. Is there someone that you need to love today? Someone you've been mean to, talking bad about, fussing with? You're supposed to love them. You're supposed to love them. Oh, goodness. Dear Heavenly Father, I ask you to go with each one of these men and women and just let them feel love in their heart. Like Josh. Dear Lord, I just ask you to forgive me for I failed you, dear Lord. And I just thank you and praise you for everything you've done. In your name I pray. Amen.